I have spent the last 11 years working as a clinical psychologist in Charleston, South Carolina. After all this time, I thought I had developed a kind of emotional armor, something that naturally forms when you spend your days listening to stories of trauma, despair, betrayal, addiction, and all the darkest corners of the human psyche. I had heard everything from confessions of infidelity to descriptions of abusive childhoods and the vivid, disjointed narratives of people struggling with schizophrenia. I genuinely believed that nothing could shock me anymore. But I was wrong. I never thought I would find myself entangled in a real-life psychological thriller, the kind that people binge-watch on crime documentaries or fictionalize in late-night dramas. Yet, there I was, front-row witness to something so disturbing that it derailed my entire professional life. For 6 months after, I refused to take clients. I shut down my office on King Street, canceled every session, turned off my work phone, and ghosted the career I once loved. It started on a humid Wednesday in June, the kind of Charleston summer day where the air sticks to your skin like a wet cloth. He arrived 10 minutes early, which already made him stand out. Most first-time clients either showed up exactly on time or a little late, nerves and traffic contributing equally. He came in wearing khaki slacks, a pale blue polo shirt, and sneakers. He looked average, painfully average. Brown hair, light stubble, a face you would forget 3 seconds after seeing it. He was the kind of man you could pass every day in the grocery store and never realize it. He introduced himself as Daniel. No last name, which was unusual, but not unheard of. Some people, especially first-timers, like to protect their anonymity. His intake paperwork was sparse. No history of mental illness, no substance abuse, no previous therapy. He simply stated he was looking for someone to talk to. That was it. A simple request in a world full of complications. From the very first session, it was clear that Daniel was different. He did not cry or vent or even delve into the usual surface-level anxieties most new patients begin with. Instead, we talked about what we had for breakfast. I told him I had scrambled eggs and coffee. He said he had a protein shake. It was like two friends chatting over brunch rather than a structured therapeutic hour. Week after week, he returned and paid the full fee just to sit and talk. Weather, traffic, books, small observations about people in the waiting room. Nothing remarkable, nothing deep. I started to grow mildly irritated. It felt like I was being used as an expensive form of casual companionship. But then something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, our conversations took a turn. Daniel started asking about human behavior. Not his own, but in general. He asked why people lie, why they trust, why they confess things they should not. He wanted to know how fear works in the brain, what triggers empathy, how long it takes to build rapport with someone, and whether mirroring someone's body language truly made them feel closer to you. I answered him because these were psychological concepts, and I had no reason not to. Educating patients is a normal part of the job. But it began to dawn on me that this was not therapeutic curiosity. Daniel was not trying to understand himself. He was studying, and I was the teacher. Without realizing it, I had been offering him a comprehensive course on emotional manipulation, trust building, and behavioral prediction. He listened intently, took mental notes, and never shared anything personal. At one point, he asked how I coped with the emotional toll of listening to people's pain. I gave him a generic answer about self-care, but then he tilted his head and asked if there was anything that ever truly got under my skin. I should have deflected, but I was tired, and his manner was so casual, so harmless, that I let my guard down. I told him about a teenage patient of mine who had vanished the year before. Her name was Sophia, and she was 16 when she started seeing me for anxiety and obsessive-compulsive thoughts. She was a sweet girl, a ballet dancer from Mount Pleasant, always dressed in oversized hoodies and deeply self-critical. She came to me for 3 months before she stopped showing up. Her parents thought she was just going through a rebellious phase. Then one day, she was gone, vanished. No signs of struggle, no clues, just an open window and a missing girl. It haunted me, not just because I failed to see the signs, but because I never got closure. When I shared this, Daniel said nothing. He just nodded thoughtfully, eyes locked on mine, like a child watching his favorite cartoon. That was the first moment I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. It was subtle, but something in his gaze changed. I had handed him a key, and he had quietly taken it without speaking. The following week, I asked him why he kept returning if he had no interest in unpacking anything personal. He gave a small smile and told me that I was helping him learn how to be better with people. He said it was hard for him to relate to others, that most people bored him or made him uncomfortable, and that talking to me helped him understand how to fit in. I asked him why he wanted to fit in so badly. He looked at me as if the question itself was naive, then replied that trust was the only way to get what he needed from people. That sentence hit me like a freight train, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way he said them, calmly, logically, as though he was talking about a spreadsheet. Something primal in me recoiled. I tried to dismiss it as overreaction, a gut feeling fueled by too many late-night crime shows. But the moment lingered. That word, trust, echoed in my head like a warning siren. The next few sessions felt like a standoff. He never directly said anything wrong, but my instincts screamed that I was no longer safe. Not physically, perhaps, but ethically, emotionally, professionally. I began to review our recorded sessions late at night, noting how he had slowly steered me away from being his psychologist and into being his co-conspirator in a silent experiment. Then it all unraveled. One morning, I received a visit from 2 federal agents at my office. They showed me a photo and asked if I recognized the man. It was Daniel. Only his name was not Daniel. It was Ethan Blackwood, and he was wanted in connection with the disappearances of 3 individuals across South Carolina and Georgia. The most recent was a ballet student from Mount Pleasant. I could not breathe. They told me they had been hunting him for 2 years. He was a master of disguise, social camouflage, a man who could blend in and disappear at will. He used therapy as a tool, not for healing, but for learning, for adapting, for manipulating. Every session with me had been a study in how to become more invisible. They asked if I had any recordings. I did. I gave them everything. The case broke open shortly after. They found items belonging to 2 missing persons in a storage unit under a fake name. Not enough to charge him with murder, but enough to bring him in for questioning. He disappeared before they could get to him. His last known location was a gas station in Savannah, caught on a blurry security cam, alone, walking west with a duffel bag. After that day, I shut everything down. I told my landlord I was taking a sabbatical. I refunded my future sessions. I deleted my website and went dark. Because how do you go back to helping people after realizing you unknowingly trained a predator? How do you sit across from the next mild-mannered man and trust that he is who he says he is? I still dream about his voice sometimes, asking about how long it takes to build rapport. I still remember his polite smile, his bland shirts, the way he made me feel comfortable before unmaking everything I thought I knew. I do not know where he is now, but I know what he is, and it haunts me. Update 1. I knew something was wrong before he even sat down. There is a certain internal switch that flips when you have worked in psychology long enough, a quiet alarm that does not scream but hums low and steady in your chest. It is the same instinct that tells you when a patient is dissociating, when a story does not quite align, when effect does not match content. That morning, as I watched him walk down the hallway toward my office, that alarm went from a hum to a pressure, like someone slowly tightening a vice around my ribs. He looked the same as always, ordinary, forgettable, safe in the way only people who know how to look safe can be. But something in me had finally caught up to what my subconscious had been screaming for weeks. I was no longer guiding a patient. I was participating in something I did not understand, and I had allowed it to go on for far too long. The session started the same way it always did, with small talk and controlled normalcy. But I was no longer present in it the way I had been before. My mind was racing, replaying past sessions, piecing together patterns I had ignored. The questions about trust, the curiosity about manipulation framed as academic interest, the way he listened, not emotionally, but mechanically, as if filing information away for later use. Halfway through the session, I stopped him. Not abruptly, not dramatically. Calmly, professionally, the way we are trained to do when setting boundaries. I told him that our work together was no longer appropriate, that I did not believe continuing sessions would be beneficial for him, and that I was formally ending our therapeutic relationship. I expected resistance, confusion, maybe irritation. What I did not expect was how quickly the atmosphere in the room changed. The air felt heavier, as if something invisible had leaned in closer. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. Instead, he smiled in a way I had never seen before, slower and thinner, and told me that I was mistaken. He said that he would continue coming, that our sessions were not finished, and that this was not a decision I got to make alone. When I repeated myself and explained that therapy does not work that way, that consent and professional boundaries mattered, the friendliness dropped completely. That was when he told me that it would be easier for everyone if I cooperated. He did not shout or threaten me in the way people expect threats to sound. There was no anger, no loss of control, just certainty. He explained, in a disturbingly calm manner, that I would do what he wanted because it was better for me not to find out what would happen if I refused. The way he said it was not theatrical. It was practical, like someone explaining the consequences of ignoring a warning label. My mouth went dry. In all my years of practice, I had worked with aggressive patients, narcissists, people with antisocial traits, even individuals mandated to therapy after violent offenses. None of them had ever made me feel like this. This was not hostility born of emotion. This was calculation. I realized in that moment that everything he had learned from me was now being turned back on me. My own teachings reflected in his posture, his tone, his timing. I tried to steer the session back to safety, to professionalism, to the structure that usually protected me. I told him the session was over and stood up, signaling that he needed to leave. He did not move. Instead, he leaned back, completely at ease, and reminded me that he knew my schedule, that he knew I stayed late on Thursdays, that he knew where I parked because he paid attention to details other people ignored. That was the moment fear finally punched through my training. Not anxiety, not discomfort, real fear. My heart was racing, but my face stayed neutral out of habit. Years of clinical composure, holding together by sheer force of will. Inside, though, something fundamental cracked. I was no longer sitting across from a patient. I was sitting across from someone who had been rehearsing this interaction for weeks, possibly months, and I was realizing far too late that I was behind in the script. When he finally stood up, it was unhurried. He told me he would see me again, and that I should think carefully before making decisions that could complicate my life. Then he walked past me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and left the office as if nothing had happened. I locked the door the second he was gone. I sat on the floor behind my desk, shaking, replaying every second of the interaction on a loop. My training told me to document everything, to follow protocol, to contact authorities if I felt threatened. My instincts screamed the same thing. This had crossed every ethical, professional, and personal boundary imaginable. I was not just uncomfortable anymore. I was in danger. For the first time since I started practicing, I truly understood what it felt like to be on the other side of the chair. I knew I had to go to the police. There was no question about that anymore. I could not rationalize this away or pretend it was a misunderstanding. But as I sat there, heart pounding, I also knew that whatever I had stumbled into was bigger than a bad session or a difficult client. And the terrifying realization settled in that once I involved the police, there would be no going back. I was no longer dealing with a patient. I was dealing with a predator. And I was finally scared enough to admit that I could not handle this alone. Update 2. I could not sleep after that session. I sat on my couch long after midnight, every light in my apartment blazing, staring at the blank TV screen like it might tell me what to do. Every time I blinked, I saw his face. Not angry, not emotional, calm, certain. A face that no longer masked his intentions. A face that terrified me. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew how dangerous it was. He had crossed the line, and I could not just walk away. Not when I had the training, the proof, and the lingering sense that something far worse was buried underneath it all. I could not go directly to the police. Not yet. I had no concrete evidence, just my word against his, and I was smart enough to know that words from a psychologist with a long client list and no physical proof would not be enough. I needed documentation. I needed to make them see what I saw, hear what I heard. I needed them to feel the threat I was living under. So I set up surveillance. The next morning, I bought a micro camera disguised as a carbon monoxide detector and mounted it high in the corner of my office where no client ever looked. I placed a second audio recorder inside a decorative book on my side table, one I always kept near the couch. It was voice activated, high sensitivity. I tested it 3 times to be sure. I checked the angle, adjusted the lighting, made sure the camera captured both chairs. It had to look like nothing had changed. I knew if he suspected anything, he would vanish. The next time he came in, I greeted him with the same composed face I had worn for every other client. Inside, my stomach was in knots. Every second felt like walking a tightrope. But the camera was rolling, and so was the recorder. I played my part. I asked general questions. He responded, as always, with calm deflection, vague charm, and those carefully curated observations that were never about himself, but always about how other people worked. It felt like watching a masked actor rehearse a role. He asked about emotional control that day, specifically how to fake empathy. He framed it like an intellectual question, something out of curiosity, but I knew better now. He was not studying psychology. He was studying me. He wanted to know what I knew. He wanted to use it. When he left, I waited until after dark and then carefully extracted the SD card from the camera and the recorder. I copied the files twice, once to a hard drive and once to an encrypted USB. I took the USB, sealed it inside an envelope with no return address, and the next morning, I mailed it to the Charleston Police Department's main office. I did not include a letter or a name, just the drive, labeled with the date and time of the session, and the words, for internal use, urgent. I thought that would be the end of it, or at least the beginning of something I could prepare for. I assumed it would take weeks. I assumed the envelope would be lost in a stack of paperwork, or the footage ignored, or that someone would finally contact me for a statement. I was wrong. They came 2 days later. It was a Friday, just before noon, and he had just settled into his usual seat. He was relaxed, crossing one leg over the other, sipping the coffee I offered him, commenting on how quiet the street was outside. I remember watching him speak and wondering how many others had sat across from him, completely unaware of what he really was. I remember the sound of my heartbeat filling my ears as I nodded and asked him a neutral question about body language. And then the door burst open. 3 officers in plain clothes stormed in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that shook the air like thunder. I jumped back so fast, I knocked over the side table. My coffee spilled across the rug, my hands trembling. He froze, only for a second, and then everything changed. His expression, the one I had studied for months, shattered like glass. What remained beneath it was cold, feral, and not human. Not in the way most people are. There was no panic, only calculation. He did not resist. He just looked at me, his eyes steady and unreadable, and then allowed himself to be cuffed, without a word. The officers moved quickly, checking the room, ordering me to step outside. I stumbled into the hallway, shaking, my pulse still thudding in my throat. I caught a glimpse of one of the officers' faces, stern, but rattled. He knew something. They all knew something. Later that evening, after the building had cleared and the officers had confiscated my surveillance devices as evidence, I received a call from a blocked number. A woman's voice, official and clipped, told me the footage I had sent them had cracked open an investigation that had been frozen for over a year. They had been searching for a man connected to several disappearances and one cold case homicide. They had no name, just a consistent voice pattern and body structure caught on a gas station security camera in Macon, Georgia. My footage gave them a match. The voice, the posture, the subtle limp in his left foot from an old injury that they had only guessed at from grainy surveillance. It all lined up. And that day, he walked willingly into a trap I did not even realize I had baited so well. But the worst was what I heard later, after the footage was processed. The sound engineer working the audio enhancement recognized something buried in the background noise. After isolating frequencies, they uncovered that during our sessions, he had spoken under his breath. Just faint words layered beneath the conversation, like whispers from a man rehearsing something darker. Phrases like, "Hide the smell," "6 feet is enough," "Bury them where the water comes high, but never floods." It was all there. I had sat for hours in that room with him, oblivious to the murmurs under his breath. Chilling confessions, hidden in plain sight. That was when I understood the full horror of what I had been part of. It was never about therapy. It was never about healing. He had used me like a mirror to refine himself, to test how convincing he could be. I thought I was documenting him. In reality, he had been documenting himself the entire time. He had just needed someone to watch, someone to reflect it all back, so he could fine-tune the act. The officers told me I had likely saved lives by recording him. But in that moment, all I felt was a sickening numbness, like I had woken up from a dream inside a nightmare. I could not eat. I could not breathe right. I kept replaying those sessions, now stripped of the illusion of safety, hearing the hidden words I had missed, watching the way he watched me. And what horrified me most was not just that I had been so close to a monster. It was how easily he had worn the face of someone normal, how effortless it had been for him to seem like one of us. I thought I had seen the worst of it, but what happened next proved I was still only scratching the surface of who he really was. Update 3. The end came quietly, not with sirens or headlines, but with a conversation that flattened me more than everything before it. A week after his arrest, I was called in to give a formal statement. That was when they finally told me the full scope of what I had been brushing up against, without realizing it. They said I had been seeing him for just over a month, and in that short time, I had unknowingly been in regular contact with a serial offender they had been tracking across multiple states. He was not just connected to disappearances. He had a long trail behind him, a pattern of manipulation, psychological grooming, and violence that spanned years. Hearing it laid out like that felt unreal, like they were talking about someone else's life, not the man who sat on my couch, drinking coffee and asking about empathy. As they spoke, my mind betrayed me in the worst possible way. I suddenly remembered the television series Dexter, the scenes where the main character casually attends therapy, calmly describing urges and thoughts while hiding in plain sight. I remembered watching that show years ago and thinking how unrealistic it seemed, how no real professional would ever miss something like that. Sitting there, listening to the police describe him, I felt physically sick, realizing I had lived that exact storyline, not as entertainment, but as my own reality. I could not accept it. I could not reconcile the idea that I had spent hours alone in a room with someone capable of what they described, that I had educated him, supported him, and treated him like any other client. The guilt was crushing, even though everyone kept telling me I had done the right thing in the end. Logic did not matter. Training did not matter. All I could think about was how close it had been. how thin the line was between professional distance and personal danger. Within a week, I closed my practice. I told my patients I was taking an extended leave and did not give details. I unplugged from my professional identity completely. For 6 months, I did not sit in a therapy chair, did not take notes, did not listen to anyone else's trauma. Instead, for the first time in my adult life, I became the patient. I found a psychologist in Colombia who specialized in professional burnout and secondary trauma, and I sat on the other side of the room, struggling to admit that I was not okay. I am back at work now, slowly, cautiously, with stricter boundaries than ever before. But I am not the same person who started this story. I know now that monsters do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look polite, unremarkable, and eager to learn. And sometimes, the scariest realization of all is understanding that even experts can be fooled.